October 7th, 1992. A man named Tevfik Esenç died in a small village in northwestern Turkey. He was in his 80s. He had worked as a farmer most of his life. He had grandchildren. He had a garden. And when he died, a language died with him. Not a language in decline. Not one with a handful of elderly speakers scattered across remote hills. A language that had already been reduced across a century of displacement and silence to a single human being. Tevfik Esenç had been for years the last living person on earth who could speak Ubykh natively, who could think in it, dream in it, reach for a word without searching. When he was buried, something vanished that had existed for at least 4,000 years. Not a book, not a ruin, not a fragment of pottery. A complete architecture of thought held inside one mind, and then, on that October morning, gone. There is a word for what happened to Tevfik Esenç's language. Not a word from any particular culture. A word from physics. A law that operates in stars, in libraries, in every language ever spoken. It has been operating your entire life without your noticing it. And once you understand what it is, you will see it everywhere you look. But you do not know yet what it costs to see it clearly. And the rest of the can't. Part 1. What a language is. Look at this. You already know what it means to forget something. A name, a face, the way someone's voice sounded before you stopped hearing it every day. You know what it is to reach for a memory and find only the outline of where it used to be. But what Tevfik Esenç's death quietly demands of us, what it has been demanding unheard for 3 decades, is the possibility that forgetting is not an accident, that it is not a failure of attention or care, that it may be instead one of the most fundamental forces operating in this universe. There is a concept that physicists call entropy, and what it does to language, to civilizations, to memory, to the stars themselves, is where we are going. But before that, a second question is buried inside this story. It will not announce itself when it arrives. The question is this: when something living is gone, and only its record remains, what exactly has been saved? What is the difference between the living thing and the document of it? We will arrive at that question, but first, Ubykh. The Ubykhs were a people who lived along the eastern coast of the Black Sea, in what is now the Sochi coastline of Russia. Mountain people, proud of a history that stretches back before any written record of them exists. They had a language that linguists, when they finally reached it in the 20th century, described with something close to astonishment. Ubykh had 84 consonants. 84. Most languages have between 15 and 30. The sounds it required, developed over millennia to describe precisely the world of those mountains, those people, those relationships, were so intricate that a trained phonologist needed years to produce them accurately. Ubykh could encode in a single verb information that English requires an entire sentence to convey: direction, relationship, time, the social distance between speaker and listener, the degree of certainty behind a claim. It was not a primitive system, it was a more complex one. In 1864, the Russian Empire ended it. Part 2. The exile. The Circassian genocide, the forced expulsion of the Caucasian mountain peoples by Tsarist Russia in the 1860s, drove almost the entire Ubykh population across the Black Sea to the Ottoman Empire. Tens of thousands of people, most settled in what is now Turkey. And there, surrounded by Turkish, by Circassian, by Arabic, the children stopped speaking Ubykh. There was no school for it, no official recognition of it, no reason anyone could name to carry it forward. The grandchildren had no one to learn it from. The language retreated, generation by generation, from village to village, into fewer and fewer mouths. By the mid-20th century, only a small number of elderly speakers remained. Then fewer, then one. A French scholar named Georges Dumézil found Tevfik Esenç in the 1950s. Dumézil was a comparative mythologist and linguist of extraordinary range, a man who had spent decades studying the deep mythological and linguistic structures connecting the ancient peoples of the Caucasus to the earliest roots of European civilization. When he understood what Esenç carried, he recognized the situation with the precision of someone accustomed to reading what was disappearing. He kept returning. For 30 years, Dumézil traveled to that village in northwestern Turkey and sat across from a farmer who had become, through no ambition of his own, the last living repository of something irreplaceable. They worked together, the scholar with his notebooks and recording equipment, the farmer with his memory and his patience, producing grammars, dictionaries, transcriptions of stories, of proverbs, of the ordinary speech of daily life. Dumézil never claimed it was enough. He understood what he was doing with a particular clarity, preservation in the sense that a photograph preserves. The light from a specific moment captured without warmth. Georges Dumézil died in 1986, 6 years before Tevfik Esenç. He never heard the end of the story. Part 3, What Burns and What Rots. You have probably heard of the Library of Alexandria. You know or believe you know that it burned? That one catastrophic fire erased centuries of accumulated knowledge. That in a single night the ancient world lost something it never recovered. The truth is slower and more disturbing than that. The library was not destroyed in a single fire. It faded across centuries through underfunding and political instability and neglect, through the gradual failure of the systems that kept it alive, the copyists, the scholars, the institutional will to maintain it. Books were not burned so much as they were simply not reproduced. Papyrus decays, scrolls rot. When there is no one to copy a text, it disappears with the same inevitability as a body returning to the ground. I think about Aristarchus of Samos, who proposed a heliocentric model of the solar system in the 3rd century before the Common Era, nearly 1800 years before Copernicus reached the same conclusion. We know this because other writers mention it, but Aristarchus' own texts are gone. We are citing a ghost, a name attached to an idea that arrived and vanished and had to be rediscovered by someone who had no way of knowing it had already been found. We know Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth within 2% of the correct value using a stick, a shadow, and geometry alone. His methodology survived? Barely. His fuller works did not. We do not know what we do not know. Every scroll that was not reproduced in time took with it something we cannot name, cannot miss, cannot retrieve. The absence left behind has no edges. You cannot stand at its border. There is nothing there to feel. This is not Alexandria's particular failure. It is a pattern. It is what happens to all organized systems of meaning when the forces maintaining them stop working. Part 4, Entropy. There is a law in physics, one of the few that appears to hold everywhere in the observable universe, without exception. It governs the behavior of energy in closed systems, and its claim, stated simply, is this. Ordered states, left to themselves, tend toward disorder. Heat spreads until a room reaches the same temperature throughout. A drop of dye disperses in water until the water is uniform. Stars burn their fuel and cool. Mountains erode. In every case, the specific configuration, the one that carries meaning, that makes one region distinct from another, that sustains a form, gives way to evenness, to sameness, to silence. The man who gave this law its mathematical foundation was a physicist named Ludwig Boltzmann. He spent his career in Vienna and Graz in the late 19th century, working out the precise relationship between the microscopic behavior of atoms and the large-scale direction of time. He discovered that what we experience as the flow of time, the sense that the past is fixed and the future is open, is a consequence of this tendency. The universe moves from less probable configurations toward more probable ones, and more probable, in the language of physics, means more evenly distributed, more featureless, more silent. Boltzmann's colleagues rejected his work for decades. The atomic theory on which it depended was not yet accepted. He spent years defending his mathematics against men who believed he was building an elaborate framework on a fiction. In 1906, at 62, he took his own life while on holiday in Trieste. His theory was confirmed within a few years of his death. On his gravestone in Vienna, someone inscribed the equation he had derived, Sk log W, the entropy of a system expressed as a formula. A life's work reduced to one line of mathematics, set in stone. There is a specific weight to that symmetry. The man who explained why everything tends toward disorder died before the world acknowledged what he had understood. And what does this have to do with a farmer in Turkey, or a library in Egypt, or a language that no one speaks? Information is a form of order. A language is not simply communication. It is a complex web of distinctions and relationships maintained against the indifference of time. A civilization is a network of knowledge, of institutions, of accumulated understanding, all sustained by the ongoing effort of the people inside it. A memory is a physical pattern in biological tissue, maintained by the continued functioning of the organism that holds it. All of these are, in Boltzmann's terms, low entropy states. They are specific, they are different from their surroundings, and they require constant energy to remain that way. When the energy stops, when the speakers die and the children do not learn, when the funding ends and the scrolls go uncopied, when the mind holding a memory goes dark, the same tendency takes over. The order dissolves, the meaning disperses. What was distinct becomes noise. Ubykh did not die because it was weak. It died because the civilization that sustained it was driven from its land. The intergenerational chain was broken. It is the same mechanism that took Alexandria, the same tendency erasing. Right now, several languages every year. Languages that linguists estimate at more than 3,000 of the world's current 7,000, likely to fall silent within the next century. 3,000 distinct ways of organizing the world. Part 5. What a language actually carries. If you want to feel the weight of those 3,000, not as a statistic but as an actual loss, you need to understand what a language carries, not words. Something harder to name than words. A language is not a translation of reality. It is a particular carving of it. Some languages have no word for yesterday or tomorrow, only gradations of distance from the present moment. Some encode direction into every verb, so that the speaker always knows, even in a windowless room, which way is north. It is grammatically required information, as unavoidable as a noun. Some encode the certainty of a statement directly into its syntax, a verb form that means not just I went, but I went and I know this because I was there, as distinct from I went and I believe this, but I did not witness it directly. When these systems disappear, the question is not only which words are lost. The question is, what ways of attending to the world become harder to think? What habits of perception dissolve when there is no longer a grammar that required them? This is not mysticism. This is what cognitive science has been working toward for decades. The categories a language builds into its grammar shape over a lifetime of use, the habitual pathways of attention. Not determining what a person can think, but shaping what they notice automatically without effort, as the unstated texture of daily awareness. Tevfik Esenç carried 84 consonants. He carried a grammar of such intricacy that trained linguists approached it with something close to reverence. He carried inside an aging working-class body in a small Turkish village, one of the most cognitively demanding systems ever documented in human speech. And he carried it alone for years with no one to speak it to. Part 6. The record and the living thing. Now we reach the question that was buried at the beginning. What is the difference between the living thing and the document of it? The recordings Dumézil made of Tevfik Esenç exist. The grammars are in university libraries. A handful of linguists scattered across a few countries can read Ubykh, analyze it, teach its phonology. No one can speak it the way Esenç spoke it from childhood, without effort, in the dark, reaching for a word, the way you reach for your own name, the way you are using language right now, without noticing the using. A grammar is not a resurrection, but it is not nothing, either. It is a different kind of preservation, colder, slower, more partial, and available to future minds in ways the living language never could be. The Rosetta Stone did not bring ancient Egyptian back to life, but it unlocked 3,000 years of recorded thought that had been unreadable for 14 centuries. What a document preserves is not the thing, it is a transmission from the thing. A record sent across time that carries part of what existed, but not the weight of it, not the unconscious automaticity, not the way it felt from the inside. Like the light from a star that has already collapsed, still arriving, still carrying information, but arriving without the source. And this is where entropy and documentation meet. If entropy is the force that dissolves all low probability forms, if it takes languages and libraries and civilizations and the light of stars, then the act of documentation is a specific kind of resistance, not a solution, not salvation, the act of slowing the dissolution, taking something that would otherwise scatter in a generation and giving it a longer trajectory. Toward what exactly? That question has no settled answer. But the act is not without meaning. It is what someone does when they understand that the form is temporary and choose to tend it anyway. Part 7. What you carry. There are things inside you that exist nowhere else in the universe. Not as a comforting idea, physically. The particular configuration of memory and association and learned attention that constitutes your inner life has never existed before and will never exist again. The specific texture of your experience, the way a certain smell reaches back 20 years, the sound of a voice no longer available to you, the understanding of some relationship that was never written down and never will be, that configuration is as singular as a language held in a single mind. When you are gone, those go with you. The thread goes dark. It is simply the condition, the same condition that ended Ubykh. The same condition quietly extinguishing the last light of stars in galaxies too far away to see. Everything that exists is a temporary form maintained against entropy by some source of energy for some duration before it dissolves. A star is maintained by nuclear fusion for billions of years. A language is maintained by the speech of living communities for thousands of years. A memory is maintained by a living nervous system for decades. The duration varies, the end does not. The question that remains, the one that does not resolve clearly, is what happens inside the duration. What is made or tended or passed along while the form is still holding.
Closing. Return.
There is a gravestone in a small village in northwestern Turkey with the name Tevfik Esenç on it. It is not a monument. There is no plaque, no recognition from any government, no marker that tells a passing stranger what is buried there. Not just a man, a world. And yet, we know his name, we know what he carried, we know what Ubykh asked of the human mind, we know it existed. We know in some technical and incomplete detail the shape of what it was. That knowledge is thin, an echo across a very long distance. Much of it did not arrive, but some of it did. Dumézil sat across from a farmer for 30 years and wrote down what he heard. He did not do this because he believed it would reverse what had happened to the Ubykh people. He did not do it because he imagined the language would one day return to those mountains. He did not do it because he thought the work would outlast entropy or civilization or time. He did it because the alternative, to stand in the presence of something extraordinary and look away, seemed to him a particular kind of failure. The failure of indifference. There was a universe before any mind existed to observe it, before any creature named anything, before the first question was asked or the first word spoken into the dark. And there will be a universe on the far side of all this after the last mind goes quiet and the last voice fades into the background of things. In between, in this window, improbable and brief things were named, things were spoken, things were carried from one human mind to another, across generations, across distances, across the long silences between one life and the next. On October 7th, 1992, Tevfik Esenç spoke Ubykh for the last time, and then for the first time in at least 4,000 years, no one spoke it. And yet, you know his name. Something crossed the distance, not the language. The knowledge that it existed, what it was, who held it last, what it cost to lose it. That is what gets made in the time that is given, not monuments. Something quieter and harder to hold. The act of witnessing and the decision made by someone in some moment before it was too late to say so. As